In today's episode, we're joined by Emma Jack, a sports and orthopedic physiotherapist from London, Ontario, who shares her powerful and personal journey from the Canadian healthcare perspective and from a human perspective as a professional and an endometriosis patient. Emma's story takes us through the complexities of medical gaslighting, the emotional toll of navigating chronic illness, and the challenges women face when their pain is dismissed. She also opens up about life after surgery and the importance of raising awareness. Join us as we dive into this eye-opening conversation with Emma Jack. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. I am here today with Emma Jack, a physiotherapist from London, Ontario, Canada. She owns her own practice, Press Play Physiotherapy, and she is in sports and orthopedic physio. So welcome, Emma.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. This has been on my calendar for a while, and I've been so looking forward to it.
Yeah. Okay, y'all, for you listening, I've been kind of chasing down Emma for quite a while now to talk about this very specific and what we both feel like, I know, is like should be like top tier importance in the field of women's health and pelvic health specifically.
Yeah.
So I am so glad that you're finally here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have a lot to talk about, and this episode is pretty special for me today for a lot of reasons. One is that I don't think we hear enough personal stories. We hear a lot about medical gaslighting. And for those of you who aren't familiar with medical gaslighting, maybe you're dropping into the first episode here. It is when you go to the very place where you expect to be held safe, to find a sanctuary, to find help, to be heard and listened to. And instead, you get marginalization, you get demoralizing, talk pushed back at you. You get dismissed with your symptoms. You get told it's age or gender or any of a number of things. Simply that it's your anatomy and your biology and not an actual problem. And so that's what we're really talking about with medical gaslighting. But when you dig a little deeper, I think the medical gaslighting around endometriosis is even more profound.
Yeah.
And so I'm really excited about that because we get to talk about, Emma, your personal story, your professional journey inside that personal story, because that's a very unique position to be in. It's not the way we all want to get better at clinical expertise, right? To have to personally go through something, but at the same time, we end up emerging kind of in a privileged place, having gone through something so difficult and so like just brings you to your knees in so many ways, like figuratively, literally, physically, to then emerge on the other side and be able to say, this is what happened, this is what I learned, and then to be able to help other people avoid that incredible delay in getting the help that they need, specifically women with endometriosis.
Yeah.
So if you will, share a little bit about, your journey with endo. When were you first diagnosed? When did this really come to fruition to you as a real, the battle that it is and was?
Yeah. So wildly, I didn't get an actual definitive diagnosis until January of this past year. So January of 2024 was a very big day in my life, because if I look back, my first symptoms started at age 12 and I am now 37. So 25 years of being in and out of various specialists and doctor's office, being brushed off, being gaslit, trying to mask certain symptoms. And so the diagnosis still in my mind is relatively new.
Mm-hmm.
The journey with the symptoms is a very old one. pretty much as soon as I hit puberty, I started developing a lot of GI symptoms. I was getting sort of this alternating constipation, diarrhea. Everybody was thinking I had these food intolerances, and I went through the gamut of different tests. I can't tell you how many colonoscopies and
Mm.
endoscopies I underwent, and ultimately, back then I was told to go gluten free and dairy free, and those symptoms should resolve. And that maybe I was just very anxious.
Hmm. What happened when you got that kind of information? Because I'm also assuming that, as what happens with so many other women, that you were probably told perhaps, or maybe they didn't even go this far into the misinformation or misdiagnosis, in that a lot of women are told, oh, GI symptoms have nothing to do with GYN, with gynecological symptoms.
Oh my gosh. I worked in healthcare for 15 years now, and I didn't even realize that GI symptoms were related to
Yeah.
gynecological issues until the past like 2 years.
Yeah.
And so I kind of fumbled through my teenage years, you know, with these food restrictions, and feeling like it was something maybe I had caused myself. And I think
Mm.
anytime we're given some food restrictions, especially at that age, like it was a very tender age to start to be a little bit fearful of food and thinking that food was the enemy. And so, all of those symptoms did continue. It was never resolved by going gluten and dairy free. I never had resolution of symptoms. Maybe it was a little bit better. And then sort of in my like mid 20s, especially, I began to feel like, okay, my periods are painful, but I don't think they're meant to be this painful.
Yeah.
I was having very severe cramping, like would feel like some days I couldn't even stand up straight. And, went to the doctor as you do, and was told, oh, you probably need birth control. There was no investigation into why the cramping was so severe. Was put on birth control and always had some sort of adverse reaction. You name the birth control, I've probably tried it or been on it, because it was just this sort of 10-year journey of trying different ways to mask these symptoms I was having.
Hmm.
And so again, I thought, oh, just something hormonally is off. This, like, I just collected it as another thing that was just wrong with me and couldn't really be explained. I started collecting a few more symptoms. My right hip started to be quite painful. It lost range of motion, and being an orthopedic PT, I was like, well, I know how to rehab this. And I did everything that I would have thought would help, and it never really did. I started to get really intense migraines around ovulation, and during my cycle, again, was sort of told, well, if you're not willing to try birth control, they're probably not going to change. And it wasn't until 2016 that I sort of found my voice in the healthcare system and said, I really feel this needs to be looked at more. There's something more here. I look at everyone else, other women in my life, and they seem to be okay. And
Mm.
so, like, there's something more to this story. And so I had a pelvic ultrasound done, and at that time they found two large cysts on both of my ovaries. And the word endometriosis never came up, not once. And I was sort
Mm.
of told, you know what? Yep, they're big, but there can be just as many issues taking them out as leaving them in. So we'll keep an eye on it. And we're talking large, 12, 15 centimeter cysts.
Wow.
And, I was seeing at the time the head of our gynecological department. I live in a medical hub city. I had a lot of trust that they knew what they were talking about, and just kind of thought that, oh, well, we have a plan. We're going to monitor it. That will be fine. And really towards 2020, it was becoming quite untenable. Like my quality of life was very low. I wasn't able to work out the way I wanted to work out. I was really fatigued, like chronically fatigued, chronically bloated, still dealing with GI issues. And so I went back to the doctor and he said, okay, we'll remove the cysts. And while we're in there, we'll look for any evidence of endometriosis. I thought, great. So
Hmm.
deep pandemic times. I had a surgery, which I now understand, just not knowing going into the surgery. The surgery was an ablation surgery, so where they
Mm.
cauterize and burn the tissue rather than fully removing all of the tissue.
Mm-hmm.
So I had that ablation done. No follow up, no aftercare whatsoever. I left the hospital that day. I walked myself out of the hospital. Like that to me is still like just such a fever dream. And I thought, I was sort of told at my 3-month appointment, yep, we removed the cysts, no signs and symptoms of endometriosis, you're good to go. So I,
So they never biopsied. They never sent it for a biopsy.
no,
Apparently, obviously they
apparently,
didn't.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly,
because that's
exactly.
how they would have diagnosed it at that point. But if they were just in there burning things
Burning things,
and
looking
not
around, but not necessarily knowing what to look for as
right.
well.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, the surgeon I saw, as much as he was the head of obs-gyn at our hospital, he was also an obstetrician. He delivered a lot of babies. This was not his bread and
Mm-hmm.
butter.
Mm-hmm.
And so about 6 months later, all of my symptoms were still present, if not worse.
Mm.
And I went back and I said, like this, we gotta get something else going here. And his options at that time, I remember very vividly saying, birth control is not an option for me. There's just too many other side effects that I just cannot deal with. Is there other integrative ways, nutrition, lifestyle that I'm missing that I could perfect even more? And I'll never forget him looking at me and being like, there's absolutely nothing you can do. There's
Mm.
nothing more I can do for you if you don't want to go on birth control.
Do you,
Yeah.
how in terms of how that sat with you, basically said take birth control
Nothing.
or nothing at all. No
Yeah.
referral, absolutely nothing. No encouragement, no anything. What happened at that point? What did you do?
Yeah. I remember, and I know for lots of women, this is not an unfamiliar scene. I remember leaving that appointment, getting into my car, and just absolutely losing it.
Mm-hmm.
Just being so devastated that this is a very real thing that is impacting my everyday life, my work, my relationships. And you're telling me absolutely nothing we can do, nothing we're going to look at more. Sort of, if you don't want my option, you're out of here. And I always come back to, I am very, very privileged. Like my privilege is all around me. I am white, I am cisgender, I am highly educated. I work in healthcare myself. My husband is a doctor, and I just could not stop and still cannot stop thinking about how I'm probably still getting the best end of the stick.
Mm-hmm.
Like that treatment was probably still pretty good compared to what some other people may be experiencing within this system. And so I started, I knew that I was going to have to take the lead on where I went next and figure out my next steps. I started working with a naturopathic doctor. I started working with pelvic floor physio. I started working with some allied healthcare providers just to help even symptomatically. Um, and truthfully, it wasn't until, and this is why I'm so honored to share my story, is because when you started sharing your story and your treatment and that you had experienced gaslighting, I think that added a lot of fuel to my fire of like, no, I need to get to the bottom of this now. And I
Yeah.
started looking into the evidence and I started to find providers in Canada who were doing the tests and the things that needed to be done in order to get a diagnosis. In Canada, healthcare, again, it has its benefits, but it also has its downfalls. Our healthcare is public. And so wait times and bureaucracy and politics are very real within this system. And so as much as I knew what I wanted and what I needed, who I needed to see, the path there is not a linear path. You really have to truly fight often to get what you need. And it took years of sort of trying to direct myself to get to see the individual who was able to do the appropriate imaging and had the background in endometriosis to get me the diagnosis. It was like I was very sure, just even intuitively within my body, that this was my diagnosis. But to get and find the person to give me those answers took 2 years.
Yeah.
And a lot of miscommunications and missteps along the way. And so getting that diagnosis in January, as much as it was, my endometriosis was very significant, was very severe, I just remember like the wave of relief that washed over me, because it was that feeling of like, yeah, I wasn't crazy this whole time.
Yeah.
Like I know my body. And it was like just this deep exhale of like, okay, like you've got this. Unfortunately, in Canada, the number of surgeons doing excision surgery are rare. There isn't a lot of funding for the education. There's not a lot of funding for the
Yeah.
surgeries themselves. And there was sort of one surgeon within my province that was able to take on my case. I reached out to him. I MacGyver tried to find his email. I personally emailed him, which I would never do, but I knew I was going to have to get crafty if I wanted the care I needed. And I emailed him and I just said, I'm just wondering, I've been referred to you. I'm just wondering what your wait times are like, because I knew it was going to be long. And very graciously, he got back to me and let me know it was 4 years.
4 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was 4 years from time of referral to me getting on an operating table and having the treatment and care I needed. And that was devastating to me. I just couldn't imagine living 4 more years the way I
Mm-hmm.
was living, with the quality of life I was living. I wasn't able to work as a PT at that point. Um, Socially wasn't able to make very many plans, or wasn't able to hold plans. There was just so many things within my life I had to press pause on. And to think I was going to have to do that for 4 years of my life, just, it was untenable.
Let's touch on part of your experience that I remember us discussing previously, about the attitudes towards. The easiest way to say this is that, coming from the obvious patriarchal background that we all do, and we are asked to still thrive in that scenario where
Mhm.
it's still very patriarchal, and somehow just ignore that and still thrive, which is impossible to do. That in that type of society, no matter what country you're in, there is a value attached to women that seems to only be high, based on your fertility, right?
Mhm.
And if you're
Mhm.
pursuing fertility,
Yes.
if you want to get pregnant. And oh my goodness, there's so much to be said about that. But I know that you have some experience with attitudes towards the caregivers that you saw in healthcare,
Yeah.
having particularly antiquated, or let's just face it, kind of gross, outdated, not even outdated. It never was, trendy to talk to women like this, that wanted to offer you services, or would be more likely to offer you surgery or services if you were trying to preserve fertility. How did that land, with you?
Yeah, it came up in so many different ways. It came
Yeah.
up in so many different ways. Um, Initially, the obs gyne that I was seeing, had sort of told me, which is a very old and should be quite antiquated at this point, that, you know what, sometimes if people get pregnant, their symptoms are
Oh,
better. And it's like,
we can just lay that one down, right? We can just burn that one right now. That myth that pregnancy is going to help with endometriosis.
right?
False. Yeah.
And as if anyone would suggest that if you weren't planning on having children, you should maybe renegotiate with that with yourself in order to solve your healthcare diagnosis. That is just, it's insane.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah.
And I have felt very rooted in my choice not to have children. But every step along the way of getting this diagnosis, it seemed like people were very concerned about my fertility status. And I had to continue to remind them that no, 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 my quality of life.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
My,
Is
my,
priority.
yeah, my first, I thought I was going for my imaging for an endodiagnosis. I was given an appointment with the specialist, and I showed up to that appointment, and they actually told me it was a fertility consult
Mm.
because they always do that before moving forward with an endodiagnosis. And I had
Wow.
never consented to that. Nobody had ever shared that with me. I was floored. I am just trying to feel good within my own body, and
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to tell me what I should be worried about.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And certainly there were some surgeons that I talked to, prior to choosing where I ultimately ended up having surgery, where it almost felt like as soon as I said I wasn't looking to have kids or childbear, where it was almost like they didn't care as much anymore.
Mm.
They're like, oh, really? And like would almost question, are you sure? And just like that constant questioning, like, yes, I know what I want for my life and for my body, and I'm absolutely sure, and I don't need people questioning that.
Yeah.
I had been through the ringer at this point. Those were like the last sort of external pressures I needed to be placed on myself or to be made feel like I was less of a candidate to
Mm-hmm.
help, because my ultimate goal wasn't to have a child.
And
Yeah.
and that so to just encapsulate what that does to you as a person, as a human being, as a woman, is this incredible. Women are already conditioned to care give and to feel guilty about everyone else's emotions and feelings and
Yes.
cater to all of that and make sure everyone's happy in the room and then take care of ourselves. So that's a heavy emotional and mental impact. Um, let's shift to that because there are so many women that will listen to this podcast, that are listening to this podcast, who have felt the same thing. They have been blown off, brushed off, or made to feel less than when they don't want to pursue treatment exclusively because of fertility. So how have you dealt with that? I know there have been, maybe in talking about some of the moments you felt misunderstood by doctors, family, or friends, how did you handle that situation in order to take care of your own emotional and mental health?
Yeah, I think that's honestly probably been a bigger, like, yes, of course, like my surgery was very impactful and very important, a huge part. But I really feel like unpacking and working through and processing all of the trauma, shame,
Mm,
guilt, frustration, anger, fear along the way has been such an important part of my recovery. Again, from a place of privilege, I've been able to work with a therapist every step of the way through this, which has been so valuable.
yeah.
Journaling for me has been a really, really supportive process. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Nicole Sachs and her work, but Journal Speak has been like a very big part of my practice. It's just a journaling practice, 20 minutes once a day, where it's like no holds barred. You just like get out what you need to get out. And that has been very, very therapeutic for me. And I think in this process, just because I have had to really MacGyver my care and make connections and have more conversations, that's where I realized like how strong and powerful the endo community really is. I've felt so much support and safety just in talking with other people who've been through it and are in it. And I'm so grateful. I think before I was kind of like outside looking in on the endo community because I didn't have a diagnosis. I didn't know if that's what it was, but I was always like, man, like people who have endo, like they're really passionate about
Mm.
this. And I didn't get it until that was me.
Yeah.
And there's so much power in sharing our stories and to help us not feel alone, because that the whole process getting to diagnosis felt so lonely and so isolating. Not only kind of socially are you isolated because you're not able to do what you want to be able to do, but it's also not the stuff that people are talking about or that you even
Yeah.
necessarily are ready and wanting to share. And so I think once I had the diagnosis, to be able to process that with others has been extremely valuable.
Yeah, there's a unique situation that you're in when you are in the purgatory, if we can call it that, between that long stretch of it's not 2 years, it's like 5 years, 7 years, 10 years.
Yeah.
In your case, 25 years. That long stretch of not knowing and also thinking you did something wrong, right? Or
Mhm.
that you couldn't um figure this out yourself, or
Mhm.
and the number of times you probably were told it was anxiety, you just needed to calm down, right?
It's very
um
sensitive,
yes,
like,
just your
yeah,
2 seconds, it's a veiled way of labeling you with hysteria,
right.
like it's 1892 still. And so that long dry desert like purgatory stretch is made harder by the fact that you can't even land on what it is. Like there's no
Yeah,
diagnosis, right?
yeah,
So it's not like there's a validation of a support community, just like what you're saying. You do end up looking from the outside in. Until then, in your case, in January,
yeah.
answers finally came, right? Um, so I'm kind of reiterating what you said, because for those of you who are listening, to be able to trust your body, to trust what you're feeling, and know that there are healthcare providers that will listen and do listen and will take that seriously, is maybe the most powerful takeaway from our conversation today, because you went through a quarter of a century of not being listened to before that happened.
Yeah, and I think for so long, because I had all of these different symptoms that even I saw kind of as like a bunch of different issues, I think I developed a bit of a story that like, oh my gosh, my body is just like so broken. Right?
Yeah.
Not realizing it could all be explained by
Hmm.
one thing.
Hmm.
This myriad of symptoms all of a sudden made a lot of sense. It's like, of course you have hip pain. Of course you're bloated. Of course you're getting these migraines. Like it all came together. And so I think that also changed my own story about my body.
Yeah.
And that has takes processing and time and work, but is I'm so grateful to be there
And a
now.
village. Yeah.
Yeah.
And a village. So for you're again, this is a unique conversation because we're talking across borders here, really, from the United States to Canada, and realizing we're talking to a lot of women who may be stuck in a situation where they don't feel like they can access care. And it brings to mind a quote from, I don't know if in Canada y'all know Mr. Rogers. Remember the
Oh, yes,
show?
of
Fred Rogers,
course.
Mr.
Yeah.
Rogers, Fred Rogers.
Yeah.
He has a lovely little book out that's just full of his anecdotes that came out, I believe, after his passing. But one of the things, I think one of his most famous quotes is to, when you're going through these hard, tough times, is look for the helpers. It's what his
Mm.
mother told him, that there are always
Mhm.
going to be helpers out there. And so that moves me. I know I have, helpers in my story. You have helpers in your story. So let's talk a little bit about that. That all came to fruition really in the last year, right? The
Yeah.
last year. And you have quite a story and how you finally ended up getting right to the
Yeah.
care that you needed. You contemplated several things and talked to several different people. So, let's, I mean, who's in the helper category, for you, for everyone listening, because we want to point people also to the resources, and anything we mention, you guys, we will be putting in the show notes that is of help to you guys so that you can just kind of click and go on that.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first person that comes to mind is you, because
Oh,
seeing you in that, I remember like clear as day. It would have been last fall. You were wearing your like Wonder Woman Halloween costume, uh,
it's almost a year ago.
in your hospital bed post op. And I don't know if you remember this,
Oh my
but
gosh.
I remember sending you a voice memo via Instagram. I sent you a voice memo and I was just like,
Oh yes.
thank you so much for talking about this. Thank you so much for sharing this journey. I'm realizing like this is also my journey and I need
Oh,
help. And, do you see people internationally?
oh
And
my gosh. I had forgotten about
yeah.
that initial Instagram, and so much had happened, and that was like a vulnerable moment for me. My face is like red. Um, because it was Halloween.
It was
It was
Halloween. Yeah.
Yes,
So it's
so
like a
I
year
was having
ago.
surgery on Halloween, and I've never, like, dressed up for Halloween or done any of that. I'm not like a dresser upper. I'm more of the introvert handing out candy, and so it was, like, way outside my comfort zone to put on
Yeah.
the Wonder Woman costume and take it to the hospital and put it on in pre-op.
I love it. I love it.
So,
uh,
yes, I do remember that message now, and I thought, when I put it up there, I was like, I don't know. I probably shouldn't even. I should just be focusing on getting better. I was like, but if I'm going through this, maybe it will help somebody.
yeah. And it
Um,
did. And it did. So that's initially how I got connected with you. I think through even like my professional network, I was working. I am a physical therapist by trade, but I also work with other healthcare providers, helping them, find joy and passion in their work. And
which is awesome.
one of the women that I was working with is a pelvic health therapist, and she had mentioned to me the Endo Summit. And she said, you know what, like I would just highly recommend you can just like you can watch it from home. You can,
Yeah.
you don't have to make the trip to, I think it was in Florida.
Hmm.
You don't have to make
Yes.
the trip, but you can watch it from home. And so I think I had like connected with you and we had an initial appointment. I attended virtually the Endo Summit and I literally did not miss a minute of that
Oh, it was
event. I
great.
It was
Yeah.
so good. And I got to see the helpers in this
Yeah.
field. I got to know, oh, okay, here are some surgeons that seem like they really have it dialed in as
Hmm.
to, how to take care of this. Here are, the counseling services. Here are
It's
all
like a
these
gold
people.
mine.
It was
It's
an
an endo
absolute
gold
gold
mine.
mine. I sat myself in this chair, like didn't leave for 72 hours. I was just like so happy to like hear the information straight from
Mm.
people who were on the front lines of this and really understood what needed to be done. And so I kind of like took all of that information and really started to run with it. I bought Amy Stein's book. She has an
Mhm.
amazing book. I connected with different surgeons that I was exposed to through the Endo Summit, and we had talked about some surgeons, and yeah, it's so wild to me. Again, Canada being public healthcare, you can't just like call a surgeon's office and say, "Hey, I want to see you." So it's a very different
Yeah.
way of going about it. I still will forever be shocked. I contacted some different surgeons throughout the U.S. and to have their admin say he can speak with you on Thursday. I was like, Thursday of this year? Like, what? And so ultimately, I connected with Dr. Sonervo at the Center for Endometriosis, and was able to get a consult with him. And I think it's really important. I feel this as a healthcare provider. I think the connection and the relationship and that therapeutic alliance is really important. So I have
Yeah.
no doubt that all of the surgeons I spoke with were phenomenal and very competent and would get me where I needed to go. But I felt more comfortable and just like a sense of relief almost in talking with Dr. Sonervo and entrusting the Center for Endo Care to take on my case. I think also too there was Dr. Sonervo's Canadian, and
That's right.
he
Yeah.
actually did his training where in the city that I live in, where my husband
Oh,
actually works. So it just felt like, okay, this feels
wow.
like a connection.
Yeah.
And so yeah, we took the steps forward to get care in the US because I couldn't wait any longer. And
Mhm.
once I knew that sort of my opportunity to live a very different life could be a lot closer. Yes, absolutely. You know, finances were a big part of that. And I feel very
Huge. Yeah.
fortunate that we were able to, take that step. But I got such great care. And, I'm just I'm actually almost 4 months post-op today.
Yes.
And I just cannot believe how much better I feel, how different I feel. That's even been something that's been so interesting is I'm realizing now how off I was before. I don't
Right.
think I realized how off I was before because it had just become the new normal.
Mhm.
And just even to wake up in the morning and feel like I have the energy to get out of bed is just like still very novel and exciting to me. All of those symptoms I explained earlier that I was having just are no longer a part of my story.
And that's huge.
It's massive,
I mean, that's
massive.
huge. I'm just going to repeat that just in case y'all didn't hear. All the symptoms that Emma was experiencing before are just not there anymore.
Yeah.
And you're doing some really cool things now on the other side of this. You're starting to get out and get back to living,
Yeah.
basically, again, doing
Yeah.
all the stuff that you love. Activity, right? All those physical activity things that as physios, and even not, you don't need to be a physio to just love being outside, to love physical activity and to be able to just, break a sweat or whatever. And, when you have that various degrees of endometriosis, all that gets taken away from you. And so tell us about what you're doing now.
Yeah, I feel like I'm like doing all of the things now because I'm so excited that I can do all of the things.
Yeah.
And yeah, activity has been a huge one. Even just like I celebrated so much feeling sweat come off my body because I
Yeah.
hadn't been able to, work myself to the point of a sweat prior to surgery for at
Hmm.
least a year prior to surgery. And so, yeah, signing up for a spin class or a yoga class and knowing I will actually be able to attend and that it is safe and there's something about it just it feels like I can be in my body more. I'm not monitoring my body from my brain.
Yeah.
I'm like really in it when I'm moving now.
Yeah.
And so that is, maybe from the outside a subtle shift, but it's a very big one within me.
It is a
Um,
big one. I once described it, and I think you and I might have talked about this before, but being in your body means that you can just go, like, you go out and you take a run, you walk your dog, you do whatever, and you don't have to think about the fact that you have a colon. right?
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
the example of like before, if you're living outside it, you're like, oh, well, should I go that far? Should I leave now? Should I might need, because you feel like you have a colon. You feel like
Yeah.
you have a vagina. You feel like you feel your small intestine, right?
Yeah.
You feel all of those things because of what's happening in the disease process. And now you can just go be and do.
Yeah, even the mental gymnastics of, like you said, what do I need to bring with me? Like, I everywhere I went, I made sure I had ibuprofen. I made sure I had the cramp cream. I made sure I had my like portable heat pack. What I was wearing, now I
Mhm.
don't even think about as much what I'm wearing. I was forcing myself to wear sort of leggings and oversized sweatshirts because that was what was kind of comfy. And if you put jeans on, that may not feel good
Right.
halfway through the day. And so, like, there's so many subtle things I can look back now and realize were under the control of that disease
Of endo. Yeah.
that wasn't me. It wasn't what I wanted. It was me adapting to the disease.
Mhm.
And so to be able to just get up in the morning and know that I could do the things I want to do and present myself the way I want to present myself. I just got back from a trip. I went out to visit some girlfriends in Denver 2 weeks ago. And, it was such a big win. And anybody who has any sort of chronic illness will understand to plan that trip and not have the wonder of, ooh, will that be okay? Will I actually be able to go? Am I going to be able to keep up? Like, there was so much surrounding every choice I was making in my life before that just like that mental load has just slowed.
Yeah. That's worth like a that's like the value of that pause, because you can just go do the trip. You can just be in the moment.
Yeah.
And if endometriosis steals one major thing out of your life, it is the ability to be able to do that, and to have that back might be the most valuable
Yeah,
win of all.
for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
So what do you wish people, one more question.
Yeah,
We could just keep
I
going.
know.
We could just keep, and I have other things. I have other ideas too. So maybe we'll make this a part
Well,
two.
yeah.
But what is one thing that you wish more people understood about endometriosis?
Mm. I think one thing I wish I knew was that it was more than just your reproductive system.
Yeah.
Like, again, I work in healthcare. I'm surrounded by people who work in healthcare. I didn't know that. The way it has
So many
been
don't.
the way
Yeah.
it has been portrayed, the way it's talked about is very much like a reproductive disease, whereas
Mm-hmm.
my disease was mostly impacting my GI system.
Mm-hmm.
And I purely did not know
Yeah.
that so many of the symptoms, there's such a variety in symptoms. Everybody's presentation is so different. There's sort of no two alike, which is what makes it challenging, but also, um, that's why you have to keep pushing forward and keep talking about it. And
Yeah.
that's why I feel so compelled to keep talking about it, because I didn't know until you shared. And so if I can be the person that somebody hears it from, I'm thrilled.
Awesome. Yeah. I think a good take home would be, if you've seen one person with endo, you've seen one person with endo, like
Yeah.
in so many other conditions, and that we don't get into the habit of labeling someone, even though it can be chronic or persistent for many, many women, myself included, you included, and so many others who have been through the excision process. It does not mean that that chronic and persistent actually does persist.
Hmm.
Things drastically change after you've had an excellent excision done and the
Yeah.
good follow up rehab. Your life is entirely different, and you can go. What we've really been describing is out of that survival mode, out of worrying where the next bathroom is, or if the meal's going to settle right, or if your pants are going to fit at the end of the day, to just like, hey, I'm going to take out on a 2-mile run.
Yeah. I,
Um,
I I just I'm still in the new phase of this, and it still feels so surprising. I'm like, oh my gosh, people have just been out here living like this. What? This is incredible.
yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. So we can, go with the proper care. Endometriosis doesn't have to be a life sentence of things that take you out of pursuing what your dreams are and what you want to do. And I hope that if employers or potential employers or whomever you might be involved with, business partners, etc., are listening, it's that because a woman is saddled with, a genetic diagnosis like endometriosis, doesn't prevent her from doing a job well done, from pursuing what she wants to do, from working out strenuously if you want
Yeah.
to. It's just that we're on the cusp of women recognizing there is excellent care out there, and that once you do get that, your life, you're handed your life, again, and there's just so much hope in that. And so it is a good time to be alive because we do
Yeah.
have these things available
Yeah.
to us. Can it get better in terms of accessibility? I think that's what we'd both probably say in terms of, looking forward, what would we like to have happen? Well, we'd like to have that excision available in your hometown of
Yeah.
London, Ontario. That would be amazing, instead of me and thousands and upon thousands of other women having to fly across the country into different countries just so they can get adequate excision care.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It needs to be more accessible. Funding needs to go into making sure that there's more expert excision surgeons,
Yeah.
because no one should be made to live the way that we had to live prior to surgery. And knowing on the other side how much better you can feel, it feels criminal that this isn't something people have access to.
Well said. Thank you for being here, Emma.
Thank you. Thank you for everything. Everything.